Well, I'll move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Ken. Second.
This is Marcy. I'll support.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now I'm gonna move on to, oh no, now, do we have to vote on approval of the minutes? Yes, we do.
Yes.
Okay. Brenda Marcy,
Yes.
Cindy Osmond,
Yes.
Ken Trester,
Yes.
Jerry Donovan,
Yes.
John Adams,
Yes.
Richard Donovan.
Yes.
Thank you. That's so much voting. I can never get used to that. I don't know why. I apologize. So at this time, the public would like to make any comments. Please raise your hand or enter *9 if calling in by phone. And we just ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes. Is there anybody who would like to? Do you see anybody?
I see no raised hands at this time.
Okay.
Did you hear me? Okay.
Yep. I can hear you just fine. So now I want to jump into, I'm going to have Larry, when we talk about the recap of the emergency services meeting and trail site inspection review and the recap of funding agency, it all sort of runs together. And Larry and I talked about reviewing the initial designs right off the bat, and also at some point doing a recap of our timeline per Richard, that we just need to be conscious of that timeline. So with that, I'm going to let Larry jump into those 3 items, and I would just encourage you, all of you, to direct your questions or your comments to Larry or Emily as we go. Okay.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Holly. And like Holly mentioned, a lot of these items are all going to kind of join together through this discussion. I think, is it Padley that I need to ask to allow me to present my screen?
Yes. Is that the phone number that we've got here, or no? What?
That's Larry. That's Larry Fox.
Larry Fox.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Make him
Okay.
co-host.
Sorry, you weren't. Yes. Wasn't in the alphabetical order with her. I think if I click spotlight, does that work?
Well, we can see him. Can you share your screen, Larry?
No, not yet.
Co-host.
Well, I don't know that I don't have the host of this meeting, I don't believe. Cindy's got it.
Who
Yeah,
has
so
the
Cindy will have
power?
to do that. Cindy there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm going to try to make Padley the host.
Gotta love Zoom.
There we go. Okay.
I have 2 Saugatuck staff and I don't know which is which, so
That would be Ryan now is the host.
okay, so then I'll make you the host. Ryan would have to make you the host because now I'm not the host.
Oh, geez. Ryan, you can probably have him screen share if you. I haven't had to do that before. This is,
After a year of Zoom, you'd think we'd have this down pat, but
Mhm.
apparently not. Advanced sharing options. No.
Now you see why we had to hire an engineer.
I don't know how to do it either, so.
So the screen share as the host, if you look, it says the screen share button. There should be a little drop that you can hit to allow multiple participants to share. And then,
Yeah, it's not letting me do that.
if you can make him a co-host, Ryan, I think he should have the share screen option.
I get it, but I don't have that option right now.
Can one of you, can you screen share the packet maybe? for Larry
Yeah,
as we-
yeah.
I can do that.
Larry, can you
Thanks,
just
Holly.
direct us to what you would like us to have on the screen? And
Yes. Let's see. Okay, and Patty, I'm gonna have to email you another couple of things.
now would be a good time to get some water or a cup of coffee.
That's all right.
Yeah,
Or a cocktail.
The bathroom break and give us 3 minutes.
Ryan, I think if you go to the participants down to co-host of Sagatuck staff and click on the more button, there's a choice that says make host.
Yeah. I did it.
Yay.
Can we see the agenda now?
Yes.
okay.
Perfect.
Ryan, do you have the attachments I had sent? Oh, these are in the agenda, that's right. All right, we can scroll down a little bit. Past the minutes. Okay, continue. So this will go back to the traffic study when we get to that.
Okay. Let
All
me
right,
know.
we can stop there.
Okay.
Go to the previous
Perfect.
colored slide.
Sorry.
Okay, yeah, this is going to be a little bit difficult, me presenting and you controlling. All right, so just kind of a recap. So we had the on-site meeting several weeks ago. It was pretty well attended. I think we all gained a lot from that. I think we were able to review pretty well in depth the alternatives 1D and 2F. I think we, on-site, I think everybody got a pretty good feel for what those entailed. I know I did. Had some good discussion and input into both of those. And then we also talked about this option being the 3-lane. And then subsequent to that, this Monday, we also had a meeting with the emergency services people. Let's see, Mike was involved. We had Greg Janik. We had from the sheriff's department. So we had good participation in that as well. So as I go through these alternatives, I may throw in things from our site visit and things from the emergency services meeting. So it's all going to kind of blend together as we talked about. So starting with this alternative, we'll just kind of go in order as they come up on the screen. So this was an alternative that was discussed, and having a 3-lane configuration, I'm going to say, is highly encouraged by the emergency services people, and 2-lane configuration discouraged, put it that way. So this option we talked about in a little more detail, and in Padley, what I had emailed to you, there's an attachment we'll get to later, but we took this and we turned it into a typical cross section and modified it slightly. So one of the concerns about having the 3-lane configuration is not only having 3 lanes, but also having the center lane wide enough to accommodate emergency vehicles without people having to pull all the way over to the shoulder, because they kind of demonstrated to us through a video that that doesn't always happen. People react differently, sometimes panic and just stop right where they are. And so having a 10 foot or having a center lane was important, and having an 11-foot center lane was important as well. So we did come up with another alternative that provides that 11-foot lane. And the way we accomplish that is through, can be a couple different ways. But one is the 10-foot bike lane is to reduce the size of that. So we've all talked about previously the AASHTO requirements for, and MDOT requirements for having a 10-foot surface with 2-foot clear zones on each side. Well, that's true. That is their standard, but we have a little different situation here that we believe would accommodate what will be called the design exception, or something slightly different. And that that 10-foot and 2-foot is for a non-motorized trail. So it's a mixed use non-motorized trail. In this particular case, we have the opportunity that we already have a designated pedestrian pathway to the side. It's actually a sidewalk. And so normally your pedestrians and people pushing strollers, those kinds of things, would be utilizing the sidewalk. So that 10-foot, what's called bike lane on this this diagram, is essentially a bike lane. And in that situation, we believe that we can get by with less than 10 feet, and specifically probably 8 feet. We still need to have some clear zones. We do need to have a buffer with a vertical separation, but it does allow us to expand that center lane a little bit, and perhaps the roadway buffers or shoulders as well. Perhaps not on that. But anyways, we believe we can accommodate 3 11-foot lanes, some buffer, then our vertical separation, and 8-foot bike lanes. Okay, everybody pretty clear on that option? Okay, any questions, feel free to interrupt me as we go. All right, if we could scroll down, go ahead.
Larry, can I ask just one question?
Yeah.
Have you vetted any of this with MDOT? Is it too early for that, or you seem confident? Where does that confidence come from?
Okay, and I'll let Emily speak to this as well, but Emily had a discussion with Kathy Samsell, who is the TAP grant coordinator. Many of you are familiar with her. Had the discussion, I think, had some of the same input that you've received before, but this seemed that they are receptive to a good solution that is backed by the community and this committee that can have some design exceptions. So they believe that we can come up with a solution that is better than what exists there now, that is safer what exists now, and are willing to look at options, although they don't want to dictate to us or provide us with answers. It's for us to develop a reasonable solution to provide to them. So Emily, if you'd add into that.
No, that covers it pretty well. Basically, she said, give us your best solution and your reasons why. Like if you just came to this was your first choice and you hadn't done all the work that you have done over the years, it probably wouldn't go very far, but they know you've been working on this for a very long time, and there's lots of different pieces and lots of different people involved in the decision-making on an existing bridge that you can't enlarge anymore. So she said to come with the best solution. I did ask if they would review it before application, and she said no. So we basically need to come forward with what we believe is the best solution and explain why that is. Was basically it.
Did that answer your question, John?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Good. No, and that was very important because it does give us some confidence in proceeding with options that don't meet every AASHTO requirement. but with obviously having to have good justification, well thought out, well discussed. Okay,
Larry, I don't know if
Yeah.
you want to, it's Richard. I don't know if you want to, go into each one of these or wait till the end and have a bigger discussion, but just to understand how important is the 10-foot versus 11-foot center lane. And I don't want to quibble about 1 foot, and I'm not suggesting that I object to the 11-foot at all. Just trying to understand it. If you have vehicles in the northbound and southbound lane, the normal vehicles don't take up the whole 11 feet, right? So there is a little bit of room, even if the car doesn't pull over. Is it really that difficult to get the fire vehicle down the center lane? And maybe Mike wants to address that, but I'm just trying to understand, how big a deal is it to go from 10 feet to 11 feet?
well, from Greg Janik's position, perception wise, it seemed that it was a fairly big deal. Now, again, we've taken input and to discuss, so he's not dictating, but he just said that would be his strong recommendation because of the width of the fire trucks. That their biggest truck was nearly 11 feet wide, 10 feet plus to the mirrors, and that people don't necessarily move to the side as they should in all cases. So again, it was a fairly strong recommendation. It's not a dictation, was my impression. Anything to add to that, Richard?
No,
Not
I
that
mean,
it-
that is what Greg said,
Yeah.
but we didn't have a discussion about it really. What is the basis for that? And, to my point, if cars in the traffic lanes are not taking up the entire 11 feet, how hard is it to get through? Because there would seem that the emergency vehicles would have 11 or 12 or 13 feet to work with, but I don't know, and I have zero experience with it.
Right, and that's true because vehicles are generally less than 8 feet. I mean, some big trucks, mirror to mirror, might be more than that. So generally, and you generally are not riding on the yellow line. So not to say that a 10-foot lane couldn't work and that they would have actually more than 10 feet to work with, but the perception of the striping seemed fairly important. Just put it that way.
Jumping back to what you just said, Larry, if MDOT would in fact let us do an 8-foot bike lane instead of a 10-foot bike lane because of the 7-foot sidewalk, then it seems like we could maybe solve that.
Right, it's a balance. So we'll present all this information. I think at probably a future meeting coming up very soon, we'll have this debate and come up with an answer or a solution as to whether the balance goes to the bike lanes or balance goes to the center lane, if this is the option that we choose.
Okay, thank you.
And Larry, Richard again, sorry. Is this where you want to talk about the vertical separation and, what's involved, or you want to put that off till later?
No, that's a good point. We should bring that up. And Padley, so do you have the email that I sent you?
Which one are you looking for?
So the one about the photograph link. So there's a PDF with a link to some photographs.
Is that the one that you just sent me?
Yes,
Okay.
just now.
Yep, give me just a second. Which one do you want up?
It's the one that references the photographs link.
Okay.
Or Emily, I could have you share it.
I've got it.
No, you can't share it either. Never mind.
That's all right. I've got it. I wanted to stop sharing for my email just for
Okay,
a
so
second. So here we are.
the top one. If you could press that link. And it should be coming up.
There we go. Can you see it?
Not yet. Do you have
Oh.
two screens or?
No, I can see it though. try this. Now we see it?
Yes,
Perfect.
perfect. All right. Now if you can scroll down to the first photograph. There we go. Okay, so this vertical separation can consist of different things. And again, that's going to be a judgment call that we're going to have to determine and submit to MDOT for their approval. A couple ways we can provide that separation. So one is a vertical curb where we're actually separating the lane from the rest of the traffic. So an example of it here. So that's an option, although perhaps visually not significant enough, especially depending how, I mean, if we had a 3-foot wide center island with plantings, that provides the visual. If we have a 1-foot stand-up curb and just curb alone, perhaps that doesn't provide enough visual. And of course, the more room we take up with a center, with an island, is the less room we have for bikes or vehicles. So it's really going to be a balance, and we're going to want to try to keep that fairly narrow. So then if you scroll down further, well, the other thing I'll bring up too is we can put curbing on the bridge. We're just going to have to put openings in the curb, and it can be under the curb to allow the drainage to get to the side of the bridge where it goes to now, so that we aren't trapping water. Okay, so the next are just several options. You can see in the foreground there's a painted area with the vertical bollards or lane delineators. So that's another option. We don't have to have bollards or delineators between the two bike lanes. We can just use pavement markings. This is a bad example. We don't want this. These are actually grabber cones. They're not permanent. But this just gives us some ideas of what that separation can be. In this particular case, they use portable planters. I'm anticipating that this is intended to be a year-round usage bike trail. So anybody correct me if I'm wrong. So we also have to keep plowing of the bridge in mind with whatever solution that we come up with. So these obviously are seasonal. And then here's just another curb island type separation. So these are the things to keep in mind. Yeah, you can continue scrolling. This is a center island with landscaping that provides obviously that very visual buffer in separation with curbs. So we can go to a very hard type separation versus something maybe a little softer with delineators, but we do have to have some vertical, very visual. So I know some people are not in favor of the delineators, but we may have to make some concessions on something. We are going to have a vertical element.
Larry, when we were talking to MDOT, to Kathy about this, they said specifically that we should at least consider a crash-worthy separator. Has that come up in your discussions, and what is it you take it they mean when they say that?
Well, crash-worthy takes it to a whole nother level that we're not anticipating going to. That is really a guardrail or a median separator like they use on the highways when they're doing work and they're closing off a lane that you drive alongside. And so that's really high intensity type crash-worthy barrier. Emily, anything to add to that?
No, I don't think so.
I understand it should be a consideration and we should have discussion about it, but it doesn't seem to be a feasible or practical alternative here.
Hey, Larry, you mentioned this, so I just wanted to ask a question. Is this trail going to be plowed year round? I guess that's a question because it does change, how to consider the bridge is the plowing of it and that separator. So
I would imagine that the bridge would need to be plowed. year round. I mean, I would defer to our city managers, but and Mike even, but I would assume that would be a public safety issue. Brenda? Brenda, you're muted.
You think by now, it has, in the township, it was called to our attention and that there are more people than we thought using those paths in the winter. So we did have to have them plowed. So I think we might want to assume that wherever they are, they're going to be need to be taken care of year round.
Okay, great. So that I just wanted to, so that'll be part of the maintenance budget is plowing year round. So, okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
I would
the other
add
thing,
too-
the other thing to keep in mind is whatever alternative we come up with, we're going to need to get the DPW staff involved for their input as to, what width do we need to get a plow down and those kinds of things.
Well, and our DPW has the plow to do the sidewalks too. So if it were something where if it were separated, they could still plow that area as well.
Great.
And
Okay, go ahead.
Larry and Emily, I would just say, remember, we're also looking for a TAP grant, and TAP means Transportation Alternatives. And we are, I think, going to point out that these pathways are going to be used for students going to school and that kind of thing. And that happens year round with or without snow usually.
Good. Okay. I think that's the best way to go about it. It's just a consideration. We just need to know that that's your intention. So very good. Okay, I think that kind of covers. So again, we're not trying to make these decisions today. We're just trying to put in front of you the alternatives that we're going to need to narrow down and focus on and then make some decisions. Okay. All right, Pedley, if you can go back to the previous PDF that you had open, your agenda.
Yep, give me a second.
Okay.
Sorry, I believe oh, there we go. And then I have to re-screen share. There we go.
Okay, now if you can scroll down. So we're going to go through 1D and 2F pretty quickly. You guys have seen these before, probably debated them a lot, but I think you understand. And so let's move to the next page. Because these options really are the same crossing the bridge. Yes, and so on the bottom left, we have that clear width reconfiguration. We call that typical cross section, and that's what you're going to see in some other alternatives as well. So this is looking at the bridge crossways. Again, this is 2 traffic lanes with some fairly wide shoulders and a 14-foot non-motorized trail, having basically excess space because we don't really need that. If you've got a 5-foot buffer, we already have 2 feet of clear zone on one side. So, but anyways, this was the 2-lane option. Both of them, 1D and 2F, are the same for crossing the bridge until we get to the north side. So this does not have 3 lanes. It is certainly workable from a traffic viewpoint other than the 3rd lane. It does create 2 concerns. One, obviously the emergency vehicles. The second is at the south end at Washington and Main Street. For people traveling south, if they back up more than that short distance of 3-lane that's provided by this option, that can cause some traffic issues as well. So I don't, especially with the new marina down there by the town or the city of Douglas and, those kinds of things, that was just a concerning item to us. So again, this is not 3-lane, but does provide a very wide, safe, non-motorized trail. That 5-foot buffer then can just be pavement markings or pavement markings plus something, but it does provide sufficient separation that we don't have to have a vertical element such as a curb or the delineators. The one concern we had too in talking about this with regards to emergency vehicles is, so if you have traffic north and southbound, as you can see, the lane southbound would be coming towards us here. If there were an emergency vehicle trying to come down and expect people to get to the sides, the people coming south would have the option of basically veering all the way to the side by the sidewalk. So crossing the non-motorized trail. And in those situations, you know, some people panic and, you know, you get a little flustered. There's an opportunity that if a bicyclist were traveling down there, they're focused on getting over, seeing the emergency vehicle in their rearview mirror and not, you know, seeing a pedestrian or bicyclist. So just something else to kind of keep in mind. And the reason I bring that up is because we did discuss another option that's a slight modification of this that did seem to be more receptive for emergency vehicles or emergency services. And that is in the 5-foot buffer lane somewhere in there. It's probably maybe along the edge of the non-motorized trail, actually, would be a stand-up curb. So very similar to the situation you have in Douglas, just south of Washington Avenue, where you've got a separate lane, more or less, and it's separated by a curb. So that way, what happens is it's actually signed as non-motorized trail / emergency vehicle access. So in the case of an emergency vehicle has to cross the bridge, this is the lane they use. We've got it signed that pedestrians and bicyclists yield to emergency vehicles and get onto the sidewalk. So that is a viable option, just something else to consider. So it's a slight modification of this. So. Any questions on this before we move on? Okay. And then there's two parts to these options, 1D and 2F. And then, of course, the part where just north of the bridge, where we would either utilize the existing acceleration lane coming south for the bike path or get off onto the sidewalk and combine those. It's another separate discussion, but I think we'll leave that a little bit separate from this. Okay. All right. Now, I think Padley. All right, let's scroll down through these, but I think that's all there is for these. Next, you're going to have to pull up the other PDF that I sent you from in the email. Yeah. Okay, now if you can close that and actually open the other PDF.
You mean, oh, the other PDF in the email, sorry about
Yeah,
that.
an email attachment, right. I think it just says alternatives.
Yep. Can you see it?
Not yet.
There we go.
There it is. Okay, now this is going to be hard to see a little bit. There you go. All right, so we have the options that we talked about. We tried to brainstorm and come up with any other alternatives for crossing the bridge that weren't already talked about and vetted. I know you had previously mentioned about potentially expanding the sidewalk, but we wanted to revisit that. So these next two options we talk about are basically extension of the existing concrete sidewalk and providing that space for our non-motorized trail or bike path. So two cautions about doing that, obviously, is we've got to address the drainage. So again, we've got to have some kind of plan to get the drainage back to the existing drain scupper holes that are in the bridge. So that's one one consideration. The other is we have not analyzed the bridge to change the loading from a live load traffic load to a dead load concrete sidewalk. I don't perceive there to be big issues with that, but our lead structural engineer that I want to get the opinion from is on vacation this week, and so next week. So I just want to have that caveat before we start these, is they haven't been fully vetted, but I think we want to discuss them as well. So this one is basically utilizing the existing 5-foot sidewalk, creating a space that is 10 feet for non-motorized trail or bike path, and then having the 5-foot buffer in the sidewalk area. So that kind of puts everybody, the non-motorized versus the motorized, in their own separate areas. It still provides 3 11-foot lanes, although by doing this, we're really squeezing things. And so if you look at the edges of the 11-foot travel lanes, there is no buffer, there's no shoulder. So you are driving right up against that elevated sidewalk or raised curve, whatever you want to call it. Not necessarily a bad thing. By doing that, you're probably going to slow traffic to some degree because of that visual, and the people, you know, it can be a traffic calming item. And so it's certainly doable. And it provides the 5-foot buffer from the southbound lane, and also provides a vertical element to an additional safety element from the bikes and sidewalk. So the one thing about this is we've talked about internally is we can designate the sidewalk versus the non-motorized trail, or we can actually combine them. But again, this might result in discussion about having to elevate that railing to 42 inches tall in order to provide that safety for bicyclists which ride higher. So that's something certainly that would need to be considered. Any questions on this one before I move on?
I had a question real quick, Larry. So when you do the 13-foot concrete addition, that's including the 5-foot buffer. Is it possible to do 10-foot? Do the concrete addition just for the 10-foot and then have the buffer be striped? So
Potentially.
It's not so tight?
Potentially. I have to think about that one. I'm trying to think of the clear zone requirements. And if we don't have the edge of sidewalk out further, is that really providing, you know, that 5-foot buffer? But that's a thought. You're kind of jumping ahead to our alternate B, which is closer to that, but not quite. All right, so alternate B is very similar. It's extending the sidewalk and providing a 2-foot buffer, but then that's going to require a vertical element, probably in addition to that sidewalk edge. Again, that could be a bike rail barrier or bike fence, more or less. So this might actually require a bike height rail on both sides. But again, it provides very clear separation between the traffic and the non-motorized. So I don't know if you guys have talked about these before and just discarded them, or if it's worth considering, but you asked us to try to think of new alternatives, and these are the ones that we came up with as possibilities. Well, again, go ahead. One thing I would say is, again, these both do provide the 3-lane, 11-foot lanes. The advantage of alternate B is now we can add a little bit of shoulder on the traffic lanes. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, a couple of things, Larry. Yes, these were considered early on and kind of rejected for several reasons. One was cost, and I gather you haven't yet factored that in, but obviously it would cost a lot more to widen the sidewalks versus just painting lines on the asphalt roadway. Another concern was the railing, which you've mentioned, having to raise the railing, and would that block the view of motorists going across, with the view of the harbor? And, that's a subjective thing. Then I guess another question is, AASHTO, is it your view that this kind of approach would meet AASHTO, or at least would be accepted by MDOT?
Yes, both of those alternatives that we put together, we believe could be accepted by MDOT.
Hey, Larry, I've ridden through there and the existing sidewalk is quite elevated compared to the road level. What's I see on the probably all B, you would have some kind of fence in between the trail and the road, but the 5-foot buffer is deemed enough to kind of protect bikers from going over that ledge there? Or?
Yeah, I believe so. And that's a really good point, John, because when we talked about that 2-foot buffer, so it's actually, if we do it and we keep the sidewalk slope towards the road and the road then is sloping kind of up at the same time, we're going to lose several inches of that face. But still, the fact that a bike could kind of veer off and fall off of that edge and then have a different situation is why we were thinking the bicycle height rail might be required with a 2-foot buffer. Plus we needed a vertical element. Anyways, with the 5-foot buffer, I think the pavement marking should be sufficient. And perhaps in the concrete, we could have rumble strips or something, which I would hesitate to do on the bridge pavement itself, only because you have all seen rumble strips in asphalt that hold water, they cause deterioration of the pavement. And so I wouldn't want to do that on a bridge that's got a concrete deck below it with reinforcing steel and those kinds of things. But so with the 5 feet, I think we can come up with a solution that we wouldn't need the rail on that side, but with the 2-foot buffer, I believe we would, or we would recommend it.
Thank you.
Okay, Padley, if you would scroll down a little further.
Can I ask one
Just-
more question? Great. What is a bicycle height railing?
42 inches.
42 inches.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be, the 4-inch, child's head proof thing that you need for a deck railing or those kinds of things. But it just has to be reasonably spaced barrier. So maybe 12-inch spacing with 2-inch pipe, those kinds of things. We can give you a lot of examples, and some of them are fairly decorative. And, some of them actually might have a 2-inch rail on the top and then have cable intermediate type things that, you can see through much easier. So there's options there.
Maybe
They can be wooden,
something like a cable, something that keeps our view, of course. So,
Yeah. The harder one is the outside railing, where the existing railing is there. We don't want to have to replace it. So it'd be an extension to that. But again, it doesn't have to be really obtrusive. If you think of a 2-inch pipe that goes up 6 or 8 inches above what's already there, it might block some view, but it's not totally blocking.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so Padley, this one is the one we already talked about. So this is taking option 1D or 2F and using the 2-lane configuration. Oh, you went a little ahead. Go back one. There. So this is the one where 2-lane configuration, option 1D or 2F, where we add a curb and then designate that as not only non-motorized path, but emergency vehicle lane. Okay, and then one more further was the colored 3-lane that we talked about before, only trying to make 11-foot lane and perhaps a little bit of shoulder, and going to actually an 8-foot trail as opposed to 10. It says 10 foot, but we need 2 foot clear on both sides. So we could stripe the sidewalk and gain 2 feet there because 5 feet of concrete sidewalk is sufficient. So I think we can make this work. It's just a matter of, how the dimensions actually final, but just need to talk about in concept. And the curb doesn't have to be there, but we need some vertical. And that's it. Those are the options that were discussed. Again, from the emergency services people, the reading I got was the 3-foot lane configurations were all pretty much acceptable to them. The 3-lane, I think with a 10-foot is better than, in their view, 2-lane. And then the one we just looked at with the 2-lane vehicles and the separated non-motorized emergency vehicle lane was also could be acceptable.
Larry,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, we haven't talked about the traffic light option yet. That was one which came up in our discussion with the emergency responders and had not previously really been presented to them. And I gather, according to Chief Janik, they would at least be open to considering that as we develop the details on it. But the idea being that you'd have a remote control for the traffic lights that would be controlled by the emergency responders. And that way they could clear the traffic over the bridge and facilitate getting across with a 2-lane configuration. But do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, we didn't get into that in a lot of detail. It seemed that it was open to that. I am not exactly sure how it would work. They said they had that option for a while, although they didn't have the technology they have now to remotely control that from further away than they previously had. But it seems like it's something on the table, although it was noted that funding through TAP is not going to pay for traffic signals, only a very small portion of them that relate to the pedestrian only type. So again, that's a fairly expensive option, but so are some of the others. So.
Larry, you mentioned the third option that the EMS seems to be open to. I just want to make sure I understand which one that was.
All right, Natalie, if you scroll back one. Oh, there it is. Okay, that's this one. So this is option 2D, or 1D or 2F, either one, both same, by adding the concrete curb between the vehicle traffic and the non-motorized pathway, and designating this as an emergency vehicle lane as well, with signage. They were open to it. Didn't endorse it, but open to it.
Okay, thank you.
And I think at the end of I should mention at the end of the emergency services meeting, we did commit to, after this meeting, perhaps if we refine these options any and maybe prioritized, that we would send them some hard copies, some bigger drawings that then they could vet with their staff or others in their organization to provide a little more detailed input. Okay. So this kind of all leads in now to the traffic study, traffic signal discussion, which I don't know if we want to try to make any conclusion out of where we're at right now. If there are some options like adding the sidewalk that you've previously already vetted and it was just too expensive that we shouldn't further explore, then this is the kind of input we would kind of like to see. If we're narrowing is good, focusing is good.
Anybody?
Well, maybe I can weigh in, Holly.
Please, Ken, yeah.
Thanks for this analysis, Larry. It's really very good and very thought-provoking. It seems to me, from my standpoint, after looking at all these things, that a clear winner would be the candidate of the 11-foot traffic lanes and the 10-foot non-motorized trail lane. I think that could be made to work with the least amount of objection that I recall from talking to folks over the years. I think that it would aesthetically be a good solution because it doesn't require raising the bridge rail. And whether or not the 10-foot non-motorized lane is ultimately used as a emergency lane, I guess that would require a lot more discussion, because I can foresee that a fire truck trying to get through there and a biker not getting off the trail could be a problem. But I wouldn't raise that as something that's insurmountable. So that, if it were up to me, I would say let's focus on a solution like that. So that would be my point. Thanks.
All right, and that goes back to, I think, the colored one, right? The Friends of the Blue Star Trail presentation, maybe with some modifications to try to widen perhaps a little bit, and developing what that vertical separation would look like.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest issue of all on that one.
Yeah, yep. Certainly cost-wise, I don't disagree with that. Of all the other options, that one would be likely the least.
Yeah, I think, Ken, I was really thinking about you when I was looking at these designs, because I know that we talked about the vertical separators, all of those vertical separators, and how unattractive that can be. But one of the issues that we're going to have if we do the 3-lane, the 11, 10, 11, or 11, 11, 11, is that we're going to need some sort of vertical separator, as Larry said. So that's like kind of where we get into some trade-offs.
It seems to me this would be very much like the new Douglas approach as you get off the bridge, and that's not totally horrible. Although I think I'd want to do a little bit better than that, but at least it's not the huge delineators that we all were shuddering about under previous suggestions.
Well, and I hear Jerry in my ear saying, pavement is precious, and you don't. It's just this is sort of where it gets difficult, is how you delineate and what you use. But that's if the 3-lane is really what our public safety is comfortable with, and that actually is the cheaper choice, then I think it's a good use of time to figure out what the least objectionable delineators would be, whether it's a curb or whatever.
Yeah, and they could be, concrete planter boxes or something that they wouldn't necessarily be growing in the wintertime, but they could still be there. Obviously, again, that's what we need to talk to DPW about plowing and, those kinds of things. But
I'll put a call into Scott.
Larry, it's Richard. One of the concerns we sometimes focus on the motorists and the emergency vehicles, but we also have to remember the safety of the pedestrians and the bicycle riders. From your standpoint, C2's standpoint as engineers, is there much difference in terms of the safety of these different configurations?
any of the options to me that include a physical barrier such as a curb are helpful. It may not be required. So like we talked about, perhaps pavement marking and just delineators would work. And Emily, I want you to weigh in on this too. But when you actually have a little more physical separation, something that they have to jump a curb to cross that boundary provides that additional degree of safety.
I agree. I think all of these options coming close as possible to meet AASHTO standards are going to be safe in the pedestrians. I think in general, pedestrians feel safer on a separate trail. So they might feel safer on something like the sidewalk being extended and having that sort of separation not being on the roadway. But that doesn't necessarily mean they are actually safer. But there is typically bicyclists feel safer on a trail.
Well, I will just make the observation that it's interesting to me that now we are looking at this from everyone's perspective, which is sort of how AASHTO wants you to think of this roadway, is it has multiple users. And so now our discussion is, multiple viewpoints, which I think is a good progression in the committee, that we're seeing this from multiple folks, multiple perspectives.
I'd like to make one viewpoint if I could.
Go ahead, Jerry.
I just want everybody to know when Holly said I was whispering in her ear, she was speaking metaphorically. Facebook's busy enough in this town. So, but actually what, she was making a point that we had discussed previously, and that is, I like you. I'm in agreement with Ken in the 3 10-foot trail with a vertical separation. And you made, you alluded to it in that we just went through removing things that were obstructing traffic that we learned the hard way. So the narrower, the better. And also from a perspective of continuity, the vertical that you call them, the yellow and black ones, if we did something like that, I think it would look like a real streamlined type of appearance, if you will. And I'm just offering that. I know, we could do something to make them separate or whatever the case may be, but if somebody from Lake Street on just saw those, I think it lends to people realizing that it's one continuous bike path, and I love keeping the bike path separate from the sidewalk. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Jerry. I think it's important that that Douglas keeps weighing in.
Well, I think we all know we have the experience.
It's true.
Good and bad.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Larry, anything else? Oh, you're muted.
All right, I think that gives us some good input. I think I haven't heard from everybody on the committee, but I think we're kind of focusing on that option, 3 lanes separated trail with a 2-foot buffer with vertical separation, separate from the sidewalk, but not necessarily give up on all the others yet, but it seems like we're focusing on that. Okay, then additional discussion kind of relates to the traffic study, because I think this could be an outcome of it. But going back to then the option 1D2F north of the bridge, whether to use that acceleration lane, southbound right turn acceleration lane as path, or get off from the roadway and combine with the sidewalk. It's another discussion item. I don't know that we need to get too far into that today, but I think that so it sounds like there's an opportunity for the city of Saugatuck to share with the county in doing a traffic study for Lake Street intersection. I think with that in mind, I think that would be a good thing. So I've gone through the traffic information that's been presented previously. So the one, I can't remember, G and F, it appeared they did a lot of traffic counts and some turning movement exhibits. And then there was a memo I included, I think, in the agenda packet from F&V that analyzed either their data or further data, but their recommendation at this point was not to install a traffic signal there. But if you have the opportunity to do a traffic study now, that can be done as part of this, I think that could really help with that decision as to, because if you're going to put a traffic signal there, I think you can do away with the acceleration lane because you're controlling the traffic. If you're not, we've heard from Ken before, he thinks that would be an issue, and other people as well. F&V's recommendation was, it seemed like the data met 2 of the 3 warrants for a traffic signal, but not all 3. And it met them during peak summertime, but certainly not year round. So their recommendation was not to install a traffic signal at that point. I don't know how many years ago that was, just probably a couple. But
No, Larry,
anyways,
that was,
so
excuse me, Larry, that was 11 years ago.
11, okay.
Their memos dated 2010, if I'm not mistaken.
Larry, if I could jump in, and Madam Chair, can I make
Yes,
some
please.
comments, please?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, related to the traffic signal study, and I see that Craig Atwood is on the call, Road Commission Director for Allegan County. So yeah, the F&V study goes back to 2010. So I think that's pretty old data. The last traffic study, which was, as Larry indicated, was pretty raw data. I did not find a written summary. Larry did not find a written summary from their study from 2018. So I don't know how helpful that's going to be. But Craig from the Road Commission did reach out, and they're going to do they're going to put out an RFP for an engineering study for Allegan and Blue Star Road. And I thought that presented a good opportunity for the city of Saugatuck and Douglas to cooperate with that study and join in if we can. I don't know if that makes sense. This is all pretty late coming information. So I don't know if Craig is willing to make comments at this time, what's triggering their review. But if you could, that would be great.
Yeah, so Saugatuck Township, actually, their board passed a resolution requesting a traffic study at the old Allegan Blue Star intersection. And I think a lot of that stemmed maybe from some recent crashes there. Everybody knows there's significantly more traffic on Blue Star with the work being done on the highway right now. But we've had issues there over the years. We've looked into our counts weren't up enough before in our, I guess, informal reviews to meet warrants for a signal there. But I know Ryan's mentioned looking at one possibly for the Lake Street intersection, and they're close enough, I think, that we should coordinate to some extent on it. I'm not sure quite how we could do a joint study and determine, if one or both or, met the warrants, where would be the best location to do it. From what I've seen of the recent counts at Lake Street, those seem to be typically higher and a lot more even. There's a closer number between Lake Street traffic and Blue Star traffic there, which I think kind of lends to a better location for a signal. But yeah, I don't know. We can kick it around, I guess, and see, how we want to handle that. Maybe Larry has some input too on the best way to do that. So we're, I guess, getting kind of the overall picture and figure out maybe the best way to move forward here. So.
Thank you, Craig.
Could I ask Craig a question?
Sure.
Craig, so I encouraged the study for a light at Allegan and Blue Star. That's become a very dangerous intersection. Yeah, so, but if we did that, would part of that study show the impact that having a light there would have on the traffic at Lake Street and Blue Star? Seems to me when that light is red, it's going to create a gap.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's kind of where this discussion started. They're close enough together, so if there was a signal at one or the other, they're going to impact each other. You know what I mean? They're close enough there that the gaps I think are still going to be relevant. The further away you get, the gaps become less evident as traffic kind of spaces back out again. But I think those are close enough. So, yeah, I guess I'm not quite sure how to handle that determination if the city or whoever's interested in doing kind of a joint traffic study for both of those, maybe that could determine where the best location for a signal would be. If the more warrants are met for one or the other, we are not going to put a signal up unless it meets the warrants defined in the traffic manual. So that's our requirement there. But
Yeah, thanks, Craig.
Yep.
I would just say I agree with Craig. I mean, you can't study one of those intersections without the other. because they are interrelated. And so putting a signal at one is going to impact the other. So it seems to make sense that your traffic study would encompass both intersections.
Hey, Larry?
Yep.
So I'm not at all familiar with these warrants and, the things that people look at, but we're changing the intersections potentially by adding a trail and pedestrians. And it would seem that, that new traffic would be a consideration of the need. Just, again, the Lake Street intersection is quite complicated, quite wide for crossing. How are the pedestrian needs considered in these decisions?
I agree. And I think that this is good timing. We can provide that information on the two options of crossing Lake Street with the trail. That can be part of that study. The only thing is the likely getting input back on the traffic study before we submit for the TAP grant is probably not high. I don't know, Craig, would you envision a couple months? They got to do traffic counts and,
Yeah, what's your timing for submitting for the TAP grant?
It's October, but we really have to make decisions earlier than that, probably
Sure.
by no later than August to have a final.
It's possible we could have something done in August. I kind of started just laying out the RFP right now. And maybe, I guess Ryan and I can discuss, if we want to do that joint one, what that could look like. If we can get that out and get a consultant selected relatively quickly. I don't know, I'm guessing they're going to have to do all new turning movements and traffic counts and things in there. And maybe it's not a good time with the artificial increase in traffic because of the work on the highway. That might impact it where it's, a kind of a temporary issue there, so.
Well, it's an exciting development. I mean, I appreciate, Craig, I appreciate that that it is something that you're talking about. And to Ken's point, I think it's really going to be nice to have some data to work with and to really have you and Larry sort of looking at this holistically. So we'll see how much we can get done, but
Right.
It's something that I think we all know we need to have eyes on, and we need to look at both. So I'm glad that the process is starting, and perhaps there's something we can use by the end of the summer.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Larry.
Oh, Madam Chair, if I could just jump in real quick. I'm sorry, I have a hard stop now, so I'm going to leave the meeting. But I thought it's very productive. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
See you, Ryan.
Yeah, it's so nice to have the engineering staff on board, because we can really have substantial conversations that are not based on what if, maybe. We're really starting to be able to winnow some actual information. Brenda.
I just wanted to add that the timing is great because we in the township we're either getting emails or calls about safety at the Blue Star intersection. But as Craig said, either one's going to impact both. So whatever would help resolve the accidents and the problems there. But we do, and we also have a committee being developed. So it's really, the timing is perfect. I know that the study that we have increased traffic because of the paving, but who knows what paving we'll have next year. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Brenda.
You're welcome.
Okay, Larry, is that good? Do we want to talk about public engagement, or did you have anything else to say about traffic?
Well, let me just go a little bit more on like next steps and schedule. Okay, so TAP grant application is due October 13th. And so if you looked at my last progress or first progress report, we've got a pretty detailed schedule laid out. We seem to be going well on the schedule. So we've had our emergency services review meeting in June. on-site review with grant coordinators if applicable. That's the TAP grant and trust fund people. TAP is not interested in meeting on site. They've seen it before. They fully understand it. Emily and I are having a Zoom meeting with trust fund this next Wednesday, I think. And we'll make that offer for an on-site inspection. Emily, you can help me again here, but we really anticipate, obviously, this being one project, but the trust fund is really going to apply more towards the off-road portions of the trail. So the portion perhaps north of Maple Street on the west side of the Blue Star Trail, and then the portion in the township, either North Street or through the park, is really where trust fund is more likely to be applicable. So we want to have that discussion, and see how they would like it packaged, basically. So that's just further discussion. We do want to get committee consensus on project alternatives by July or August at the latest, and then developing that funding package. So I think we're headed in a good direction. I don't know if next week is a good opportunity, enough time for the committee to digest what we've gone through today, to come up with, a one alternative or a couple alternatives to further vet and maybe put costs to for the bridge, and then also then start talking more about the other portions of the trail. So, Richard, did you have more specifics you wanted to see on that timeline for the grant?
No, we just kind of wanted to make sure that we are still on time for that October deadline, and for you to make sure the committee understands what needs to be done between today and that point in order to meet the deadline.
Hey, Larry.
Yes, hi, Joe.
Yeah, Joe, jump in. Go ahead, Joe.
So I've been talking to our park commission and to my board. One of the things that we've heard back as I've been onboarded here is that North Street section there. There's historically been talk about it going down North Street or somehow through, it's quite a wet area within the south end of the cemetery. And we would like to kind of recommend, instead of going through a residential neighborhood for the bike trail, is that since the township already owns the whole frontage on Blue Star, to continue the trail similar to what it's like on entire Blue Star, and have it cut in there on Clearbrook so it would go around our cemetery, but fronting on Blue Star instead of going through some neighborhoods and cutting through some stuff.
Oh, are you saying you don't want it to go through the park? You want it to stay on the roads?
Yeah, so I have a drawing. Can you see my face?
Yeah.
Okay. So I printed off the packet today, and let me know if you can see right here. Instead of it cutting through the park as it's a wet area, the park commission is so far more wanting to protect park area and natural spaces. So if the trail could come up and over, it avoids residential area and having to go in front of someone's house or something, and it keeps it within the township's property, which would probably make it easier in that aspect.
Okay, I understand exactly what you're saying, Joe. When we did our site visit, there was a neighbor that came out and suggested that as well. But I will caution you, and we can look at this, but we're going to need to put together some costs, because from my recollection, if you get just on, we're on the west side of Blue Star Trail, obviously, that's where the whole trail is. So unless we cross in two places, then we'll stay on the west side. But through the park area and through the river crossing, creek crossing, there is a very steep, very deep embankment that will likely require boardwalk or something to that effect. So you might be swapping boardwalk through a wet area for more boardwalk along the roadway, but we can evaluate that and take a look at that. That seems to sound like that's what your Parks Committee would like to see.
Yeah, the Park Commission has the authority over the parks. So they did mention that they would like to see that as it would be going through the park area. And they just trying to address some residential concerns, and it just kind of keeps a uniform look of the entire trail system from north to south in the township, that it stays on Blue Star. Because it does make an understanding there between Clearbrook intersection in Blue Star and Holland in Blue Star, as that is a commercial section, and it's really hard to even try to get a trail there. So it understandably is why you can see it going down Holland Street and around. So the thought here for the individuals I spoke with, that would just make it a little bit easier for us.
I'm pulling up Google Earth right now to look where Clearbrook is. So, okay, I see that. So let me ask this. So this is kind of where the committee versus the individual entities and how we approach each one as part of this whole project goes. I would certainly be willing to do a Zoom meeting with your Parks Commission, with the township, to talk about alternatives if the committee who hired us feels that's appropriate, or are all these committee decisions. So something to throw out there.
I wanted to bring it up for the committee as a whole, not just pointing at you, Larry.
Okay, all right.
Talking. So it's more for the committee to talk about, as you know, on behalf of the township. The conversation is we'd like to look at that particular avenue within the section of the township to just make it easier for some of our residents. So I just wanted to bring it up for everyone.
I would say that, Larry, we can talk about that and decide how best to proceed. The one thing that comes to my mind, I think the trust fund, if I remember right, you will weight us better if we go through the parkland because it's more experiential. Is that correct?
I would say yes, potentially. Emily can weigh in too, but I mean, I'm glad this is good timing that Joe brought this up, because we can talk with the trust fund people next week about this now that we know that there wants to be some additional consideration up there.
I just want to know for Larry and Holly, our park commission is elected and would have to vote and approve cutting through the entire park. So I just have to let you know that.
Okay, so Joe, what you're saying is the township would prefer that the portion of the trail stay on the roadways.
That has been the conversation when I've talked individually, because nothing has been brought to the park commission on the park trail. So they have yet to review anything. I did tell them at one of their last meetings that once we get kind of a more concept plan put together, that I would bring it to them for them to review. So They would have to authorize anything cutting through the park property.
Okay.
Right. And Joe, sorry, Holly.
I see Brenda has her hand up, and I just didn't know if she wanted to weigh in from the township.
I just wanted to ask a quick question before Richard speaks. What's the distance of the added roadway for the bike trail, Joe?
I'm not sure. I haven't measured it.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you had an idea or not. I'm trying to picture it. Okay.
It would just, instead of going down North Street, because through conversations with different individuals, I've heard some of it all the way down on North Street from Blue Star to Holland, and then some of it conversations I've been told in the past where it would cut through the parks and part of the cemetery to Cemetery Road or up. And there's been different conversations, so I don't know which one we're looking at.
Oh, okay.
So I just wanted to make mention to the committee as a whole that that is what has been discussed at our park commission meetings. So I just wanted to make that known to everyone for conversation.
Okay, thanks for that input. I think Larry can follow up to answer Brenda's question, and we can talk behind the scenes about how best to incorporate your Parks Commission. And John, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just going to add, the primary reason that that portion wasn't considered was the issue that Larry mentioned, the significant amount of boardwalk. I guess I would suggest before we go too deep, if it's possible to, just do a high level estimate, this amount of boardwalk. I know that's many times the cost of a regular trail compared with the other route, just so we have an idea of the cost differential from a very high level before we spend too much resources on it. Because that was kind of the reason it was rejected, and, maybe it's worth reviewing, but I would suggest we start there.
Yeah.
Just so we're all aware of that. Yeah.
We have no idea what's going to happen with lumber prices, so
Right. And there's a fair amount of boardwalk in the other route too, but perception is it'd be substantially more on that route, but.
Okay, all right, thank you. Let's move ahead.
Hey, I think with that, we can talk public engagement. All right, so I don't know if this is my role what are there particular questions, or I guess the idea then is to talk further about engaging the public as well as the individual boards or councils from each community in our process.
Yeah, so I think really as what I would be looking for is some guidance about, for me, it's a bit of a chicken and an egg conversation, because do we go to the public while we're looking at these different routes and different possibilities? Do we want to wait until we have A, B, and C very delineated? Also, I just don't know sort of the best way to go about that. And I guess I wonder what your experience is with trails like this, and what makes the most sense.
All right, this is where I'd like to call on Emily to provide her expertise.
Or I think that having some concrete options there's too many options right now, I think, to go to the public. So I would go to have public input once we have options narrowed down to 1, 2, and potentially 3 options, to have those discussions. For the TAP grant, we need general public input, as well as property owner input. If we're impacting any neighboring properties, they want to see sort of 2 different types of public input. So those are the 2 pieces I would work on. And then the trust fund is later. You need something very particular for them, but you can also utilize all this public input that we're doing for the TAP grant as well. So I think the best thing would be to get better options, and you can at that public input talk about how you got to it, related to costs in different ways, why you narrowed it down, and then take input on the options you have available, and then make a decision. Is that what you were looking for?
Yeah. And does anyone else have any? Richard?
Yeah, Emily, what is the nature of the public input, or what should it be in your experience? All of our meetings are open to the public, but do you foresee having a dedicated public meeting, perhaps, at the high school or something, if we're allowed to do that, or in a Zoom forum where we advertise it in the paper and let everybody know in advance what the 2 or 3 options are we're considering? Or is there some other way to approach it?
So TAP does not say what it has to be. So you could get away with saying you've had public meetings. I think because this has been long in coming and you've had a lot of public input over time, I think it would be good to introduce it to the public and let them know you've been doing your work and this is what you've come up with. You could have just a regular advertised, public meeting, an open house kind of format. So people could come in and look at the options. I think that would probably be the best. You could try Zoom. I think Zoom is a little harder to get public feedback. Since restrictions are opened up, I mean, another option is, through some kind of online like survey, but I don't know. I think an open house would work well where people come in and they can talk to individuals about what's going on and you have boards that show the different options.
Holly, if I may.
Yes, yeah.
I appreciate that advice, and I'm definitely concerned that we do have adequate public input. I know that the Saugatuck City Council is going to be very interested in doing that, and probably will want to have its own plan for how we orchestrate that. I've even heard suggestions that we do a public survey. So that ought to be a discussion that's really coordinated well with our city council.
Joe, did you have a comment?
Yes. One thing, I think it was Emily that was talking about a showcase. Having recently worked on a couple park and recreation projects in another community, one of the things that we did with a project is we put the design with an open house and put it out, and then people could talk about, all right, this is what I like, and they can see it, and it's kind of a community get together. But they were able to vote within at the thing, and put a little, everyone who came got a little ticker, and they could put the little ticker in the pot, and that was them conducting a survey. And then at the same time, for individuals who don't like to show up to public things, we did a survey of them voting to which one they liked for a particular project that they wanted to see. And that could be something that could happen once you have the concepts 1, 2, or 3, and then they can choose and give feedback that way.
Interesting idea. And Ken, to your comment, I think we definitely will need to do presentations to each council. So, Emily, did you have something?
Well, I'm just thinking about the timing that Larry was saying. I mean, if we're trying to get a TAP grant in October, so I start thinking backwards, it's not a lot of time, and we know that public input takes time. So I think like a survey would take a fair amount of time. I'm a little concerned with putting it out to the public on which you like best, because you guys have done so much hard work it isn't what any of you like the best, right? It's figuring out what's necessary by all these different users and balancing that. And I think that can be very difficult to do in any kind of voting format, because you're really just coming up with what can we possibly do? We have emergency services, we have bike safety, we have car safety, we have aesthetics to think about and how to balance all that. So I think coming up and really explaining how you've gotten to that, and then asking for feedback about what concerns are, I think is what's most important. So then you can all take those concerns and then make a balanced decision based off of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with Emily. I think, taking a vote among the public, it's very hard for them to be as informed as we are. And if it's an uninformed vote, it really doesn't help very much.
Well, I'm not suggesting a vote. I am suggesting a survey, and those of us who are elected representatives of the public owe it to the public to get input from them on our plan. And I think we need to do that.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah, Ken, I guess it's just, is it a survey or is it input? Survey of choosing options, or is it, here's an opportunity to provide input, here's what got us to this decision, and what, might you change about, or what do you like, what don't you like, those kinds of things.
Well, there are a number of ways of doing it, but I'd rely on our city council to have a discussion and determine what makes them the most comfortable. Holly, what do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a conversation that we can have with our council. And then we can go from there. I like the idea of having an open house and presenting, and also talking to our councils and boards and going from there.
I definitely think this is Emily, sorry, going to all the governments is really important. I'm just trying to think of timing, like having the public open house first and then bringing that information. So then it's even more refined back to each board and then talk about that. Because by then we should have better numbers. I mean, we're going to need resolutions of support. We're going to need resolutions probably, depending on who the grant applicant is. We're going to need to know who's going to be maintaining it, where match money is coming from. So there's going to be lots of discussion for each board, and they'll all be probably a little bit different. So all those meetings are going to have to happen. So I'm just thinking timing that maybe an open house of some sort that maybe includes some kind of public input form, a survey, but really providing input on the concepts, could go out with that. And it could go out in another way to gain more information, as Ken suggested, and then go to each board once we have more information.
That seems reasonable. Does everyone agree with that? All right, okay. I think that's good. So is there anything else we need to talk about? Nope. All right, I think it's almost happy hour. So I want to, at this time, I think I'd like to open us up for general public comments, if there's any comments. I don't see anybody. Padley, do you see anybody?
There are no raised hands at this time.
Okay. Do any members have closing comments? Nope. Okay. If there's
Richard looks like he has a comment.
Richard? Yes,
Yeah.
Richard. Go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry, Holly, I don't want to prolong this, but the question I raised with you and Ryan, which I didn't get an answer to, about the resolutions that created the committee contemplated that we would submit a report by June 1 or use our best efforts to do so. And then I wasn't clear on the resolutions that appointed the elected officials to the committee. Do they have time limits? And, you know, are we running into an issue where, you know, the committee is not authorized to proceed?
I'm still waiting for clarification. I really don't know enough to answer that question, quite honestly. So let's see what our city managers, how they respond to that in regards to the language in the interlocals, and we'll see what we need to do. And maybe that's something we can do when we bring some information back to council. I don't know. I'm just trying to think ahead. So stand by.
Yeah, Holly, officially, we can alter that resolution. We can amend that. And I'm glad you brought that up, Richard. I think we should. Otherwise, we may be arguing about a technicality.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ken. That's good to know. All right. Does anyone else have anything?
Can I just ask a quick question while I have you all on here? Have you ever done a trail user number, like survey how many users of the existing trails are there between Douglas and the Saugatuck trails?
Richard, John, have the Friends done anything like that?
We have not,
Okay.
other than visual, not an official survey, no.
Okay. I was just curious. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else? Are we good? Okay, I'm not completely sure what our next meeting is going to be, so I will talk to Larry and Emily, and I'll get back to you sooner, not later. So you can get that on your calendar. And this was a very helpful meeting. We covered a lot of ground today. Thank you very much. And if there's nothing else, can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Okay,
Second,
all right, thank you. And Madam Clerk, may we have a roll call? And if not, I'll do it.
I was muted, sorry, yes. And that would be Marcy,
Yes.
Osman,
Yes.
sorry if I say this wrong, Meridian,
She's excused.
okay, Leo,
Yes.
Adams,
Yes.
Donovan,
Yes.
Truster.
yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize there were two Donovans. Is Jerry Donovan? Who did the first one?
That was Richard.
Perfect. And then Jerry Donovan.
He's got us on mute, so.
All right, that is everybody then.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Padley. I know this was a little rough, but I really appreciate you hanging in there.
Yeah,
And
I'm so sorry, everybody.
Gary's.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you all soon. Have a good weekend. Thanks.
You.